Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Poems and Paintings. Today's day 105 and more review today. So now that we've covered nouns and adjectives, we're going to mop up the remaining forms. So let's start by looking at short form adjectives, and we're going to look at a painting here called Pushkin на лицейском экзамене в Царском селе 8 января 1815 года. And this is by Repin. It was actually done in 1911. So this is a young Pushkin who's declaiming his poetry here at a gathering, and he went to he was actually in the first class of a prestigious new school called the Lycée for young noblemen, and here he is reading his poetry as a very young man. I think he's maybe 14 or 15 or something. I don't remember exactly. But in the audience is Державин. You see, he's the old man there behind the sort of judges table, and anyway, Державin perked up when he heard Pushkin, and he said, this kid's a genius, basically, and he was correct, of course. So this moment was regarded later as a sort of passing of the torch from the old guard, like Державin, to this young genius Pushkin. Anyway, let's look at some short form adjectives and recall how these work, and then we'll fill in the blanks, some blanks to describe the painting. So remember that short form adjectives in modern Russian, we're talking about a pretty limited set of adjectives. So let's give the rundown on this. Historically, there were two sets of adjectival endings, basically. If you go way back, then adjectives had the same endings as nouns, right? So you had noun endings, essentially, that were used for both nouns and adjectives. Then later, you had a new set of longer adjectival endings that came up, and they developed from pronouns, right? If you think, for example, of dobrому, or even better, хорошему, right? Like a long masculine adjective there in the dative. That ending yemu looks just like the pronoun yemu, right? So if you look over the endings that today we think of as normal adjectival endings, you'll see that they began life as pronouns. And so basically you end up with these competing forms, right? The older forms, which look like noun endings, and the newer forms, which look like pronouns. So the longer forms, the pronoun forms, came to dominate in Russian. And that's why we think of them now as just the standard endings. So what happened to the short forms? Well, they sort of fell out of use. The first thing that happened was they fell out of use for all cases except the nominative. Right, so historically there's a full set of endings like this, and indeed you will see this every once in a while, like in Russian poetry or in certain stock phrases. You'll see short form adjectives used in some case other than the nominative, right? But for our purposes, that's very unusual, and so we're not going to study that by any means here. So in modern Russian, only the nominative case is used for short form adjectives. These endings are going to look just like noun endings, right? So, for example, masculines are going to have no ending. Feminines will end in a, neuters in o, and plurals in y, typically, unless there's some spelling rule issue or something. So there's that, right? So the only place we use short form adjectives now are for predicate adjectives, right? For example, я голоден, I'm hungry, right? I, subject, understood linking verb, and then predicate adjective hungry. Right, so that's the first thing. In modern Russian, short form adjectives can only be used in the nominative singular as predicate adjectives. The next thing to add is that, in theory, lots of Russian adjectives have short forms. And if you're reading a text, especially an older text, you're going to see, lots of adjectives used in their short form, again, when they're being used as predicate adjectives. But when it comes to learning Russian and just normal everyday spoken Russian, short forms are limited to a pretty small group of adjectives. So especially as learners, it's most important to focus on these few adjectives that are used all the time in their short forms, and then maybe listen passively for uses of other adjectives in the short forms, right? The last thing to add is that there are some adjectives that have no short forms whatsoever. And a typical example is Ruski, right? Any adjective ending in that ski suffix, those have no short forms, period. Right, so anyway, there's quite a lot to keep tabs on here. But let's focus now on the some common examples, and most of these we saw last year. So, for example, живой. Okay, this adjective you hear in its short form fairly frequently. Жив, жива, жива, живый. For example, let's say you've had a rough night or whatever, and your friend is asking you, hey, are you alive? Ты жив, right? You understood linking verb, predicate adjective, жив, right? Свободный. Okay, there's one where we get a mobile vowel coming in, right? We've got that final cluster, the n, right? So our short form for the masculine is свободен, свободна, свободна, свободный, right? And again, look those over and you see they look exactly like noun endings because that's what they are actually. Okay, больной, there's an in-stressed adjective in its long form. Again, we have a mobile vowel coming in. We get болен, больна, больно, больны. Right? Then we have another one, rad, which actually is only used in a short form. It doesn't have any long form at all anymore, at least. So we have rad, rada, rada, rady. Okay, so let's fill in some blanks here. Let's say Pushkin here is so young, right? Looking at the painting, he's so young. Pushkin здесь так молод. Ему всего 15 лет. He's just 15. Okay, so I guess he was 15. I think I sort of researched that at some point. Он учится в лицее. He's studying in the lycée. Okay, again, that's this prestigious school for noblemen, and it's attached to the palace in Tsarskoye Selo, right? The Tsar's village. By the way, that village now now it's a small town. It's called Pushkin now. It was eventually renamed after Pushkin. Okay, anyway, занятый. Okay, it means busy, occupied. It's often used in its short form. Весь зал занят, right? The whole auditorium, the whole hall is occupied by listeners. Весь зал занят слушателями. Каждое место в зале blank. Every seat in the hall is taken, occupied. Okay, место, we need neuter, занято. Каждое место занято. 3. Нужный. Pushkin держит бумагу с текстом стихотворений. So Pushkin is holding a piece of paper with the text of his poems. Но она ему, по-видимому, не нужна. Apparently he doesn't need it, right? Apparently it, to him, is not necessary. Okay, it is not necessary, right? Again, that predicate adjective position. Она ему, по-видимому, не нужна. 4. Уверенный. This means certain. Okay, so if you say things like I'm certain, she's certain, whatever, you get short form. Державин уверен, что перед ним стоит великий поэт. Он, конечно, прав. So Державин is certain that before him stands a great poet. And of course, he's correct. So there's another one, prav, right? Prav, prava would be the feminine, pravi would be the plural, right? It means you're correct, you're right about something. 5, согласный. This means you're in agreement. So публика, наверное, blank with Державин. So the public, the audience, is probably in agreement with Державин. Публика, наверное, согласна с Державиным. Этот молодой человек гений. 6, довольный. This means satisfied or happy with something. Все blank and happy. Everyone is satisfied and happy. Все довольны и счастливы. Okay, so there are two short forms, right? Счастлив means happy, like он счастлив, he's happy. And anyway, here we have it in the plural, счастливый. Pushkin сам blank. Pushkin himself is satisfied with himself, instrumental. He's happy with himself and very happy. Or again, more literally, he's satisfied with himself and very happy. Pushkin сам доволен собой и очень счастлив. Okay, let's now review pronouns, right? So again, I'm not really going to spend all day talking about these forms. Just look over the table and see how many of these you remember. And again, moving forward, we have to assume that you're fairly familiar with these forms because we went over them so much last year. Only thing to note maybe is look at the forms that would, in the third person, like его, ее, их, right? These forms would normally begin with a vowel, but if they're following a preposition, we use a special form with an N, right? So we get this N cropping up. Those forms with the N are for use after prepositions, right? So for example, if you say, I'm looking at him, you can't say, я смотрю на его, right? You could say, я вижу его, right? I see him. That's just a direct object without a preposition. But if you're looking at him, we get na coming in, and so a preposition, we've got to use него after it, the form with the N. So make sure you understand what's going on there. And otherwise, let's just fill in some blanks. Now here we're going to describe a painting, a wonderful little painting of a kind of informal breakfast scene here with three kids and mom spooning out the whatever that is. За завтраком, literally behind breakfast. Now, what does that mean? Well, remember, you may remember that in Russian you sit behind the table, which makes good sense, right? So за столом, они сидят за столом. Or you can also say, what are you at the table for? Are you there? Are you sitting at breakfast, behind breakfast? Well, that's what we have here. За завтраком. Okay, so дети сидят за столом. They're sitting literally behind the table. Who else is with them, right? Кто еще с, right? So we need an instrumental form, and we're now substituting a pronoun for дети, right? So this is going to be a they, right? Who else is with them? Кто еще с ними? Mama, right? Mama с ними. Mama is there with them. Mama подает soup. Mama is serving up soup. She, again, let's substitute now pronouns and say she is serving it, meaning the soup, with love. Okay, so она, that's mama. Она подает. Okay, now we need an accusative pronoun for soup. That's masculine, so it's going to be его. Она подает его с любовью. Она подает суп с любовью. 3. Mama любит своих детей. Mom loves her children. They, her also love, right? They love her too. So they, her. So they will be the subject. Они, right? Talking about the kids. And mom will now go into the accusative. They love her, accusative. Они ее тоже любят. 4. Дочь сидит рядом с сыном. A daughter is sitting next to a son, right? Sort of from the perspective of the mom here. So let's, again, substitute pronouns and say she is sitting next to him. Or more literally in the Russian, she is sitting in a row with him. Ряд means row. Она сидит рядом с ним, right? Instrumental, с ним. 5. Дети смотрят на нас. So the kids are looking at us, and let's say we are looking at them. Дети смотрят на нас, и мы, right, мы, nominative, смотрим на них. Again, because of the preposition, we've got to get the form with the N there, на них. The soup is tasty. Soup вкусный. In it is cabbage. I'm just making that up. I don't know. That's my best guess. Anyway, in it, that'll be masculine, right? We're talking about soup. We need the form with N because of the preposition. And we'll say в нем. В нем есть капуста. 7. На столе скатерть. Right? On the table is a tablecloth. On it are plates. Okay, скатерть is a feminine noun. You couldn't have known that, but I've told you. So let's say on her, literally, right? We're thinking feminine. На ней тарелки. 8. Мальчик смотрит в стакан. And let's again just say the same thing with pronouns. He's looking into it. See the kid peering into the glass there. I think maybe he's found a fly or something. Okay, anyway, мальчик смотрит в стакан. Он смотрит в него. Again, there's стакан, masculine. We need the form with the N after в. 9. Суп едят ложкой. There's a nice little sentence. Literally, soup they eat with spoon, right? Ложкой here is an instrument appearing in the instrumental. So this is one of these Russian constructions. They're quite common, by the way, telling what people do generally, what one does. You get a third plural uh, verb, right? And in English, you might say, well, people eat soup with spoons, or make it passive and say, soup is eaten with a spoon. Okay, so let's say with it, meaning with a spoon, people also eat ice cream. Okay, so here we need an instrumental. Our noun loshka is feminine, and so that'll be yay, yay, right, with it, instrumental. Ей также едят мороженое. 10. Детям нравится soup, right? So the kids like the soup. The soup is pleasing to the kids. Dative plural, let's say the same thing with pronouns and say, uh, to them it is pleasing. Or well, let's flip it over and say on, right? It is pleasing to them. That would be a little more natural. On im nравится. On im nравится. Okay, let's fill in a few blanks with just random sentences here. Let's fill them in with other pronoun forms. Come visit us. Come visit me, sorry. Приходи ко мне, right? We need the dative there. Now, here's something kind of important to note. These pronoun forms for ya that begin with an MN cluster, that MN cluster is almost always broken up in Russian. And that goes for any preposition that comes before, мне or mной. And so here we see that приходи ко мне, right? Not к мне. That's kind of hard to say. So, for example, the instrumental would be со мной, with me, not с мной, right? Instead, со мной, we get the mobile vowel appearing with the preposition. Okay, at me, it's fun, right? It's fun at my place. У меня весело. 2. Мы. Will you not go with us to the dacha tomorrow? Okay, instrumental. Не поедешь с нами на дачу завтра? 3. Ты, I'll tell you what they are saying about you, what people are saying about you. Okay, I'll tell you, that'll be indirect object, dative. Я расскажу тебе, что and now we need prepositional, about you, что о тебе говорят. 4. On, we wrote to him and received from him a response. Мы написали ему, или мы ему написали и получили от него ответ, right? От preposition, we need от него with the N. 5. Она. We're visiting her. We're going to visit her. So again, к, that's going to take the dative. Мы идем к ней в гости. We're taking flowers for her. We're taking her some flowers, indirect object. Again, ask, what are we taking? Цветы. That's the direct object accusative. Here we need a dative, indirect object. Мы несем ей цветы. 6. Они, let's say at them is a big problem. They have a big problem, but I will help them. Again, helping takes the dative. У них большая проблема, но я им помогу. Dative. Okay, let's review another big topic that we went over last year, and this is there's a lot of really useful Russian grammar baked into this table here. So this is something that's really well worth going over because these forms are just used constantly. Right, we're starting with the question words. They're very common, of course. Что, кто, когда, какой, где. Right, any word that can begin a question, we call those question words. And then as we learned last year, we can create some other really useful words from any question word. And this is, for the most part, very regular, right? We can first create negative forms that start with ni, like ничто, никто, никогда, никакой, никак, нигде, никуда, ниоткуда. So you see, pretty predictable. The only thing to note here, as you may remember, is that the form ничто, right now, of course, we got that by simply adding ni to the question word что. So our first result there would be ничто. But as we know that form has been basically replaced by ничего. So in normal Russian, you really don't hear ничто at all, really. It's almost always going to be replaced by ничего, even when nothing is the subject of the sentence. So even in cases where you really would logically expect ничто, you're going to hear ничего. So just to take a simple example, nothing helps. Well, you could say ничто не помогает, but it just sounds weird. You'd probably hear ничего не помогает. Now that makes a little more sense as a direct object of a negated verb, like я ничего не понимаю, right? I don't understand nothing. Again, we're getting the double negation. Remember that in Russian, double negation. I don't understand nothing. Я не понимаю ничего. Or think, for example, with a non-existent statement. У меня нет ничего. I don't have nothing. That means I don't have anything, right? So what's the difference between the two indefinite forms? That's the trickiest part of today's grammar probably, is knowing when to use forms in to and forms in не быть. So let's take, for example, что-то versus что-нибудь. Note, of course, that they're both written with a hyphen, right? That hyphen isn't there just for learning purposes. It's actually written. So the problem here is that English isn't much help because both что-то and что-нибудь could and usually would be translated as something, right? It's true that что-нибудь will sometimes translate as anything, but not consistently, and so it's really not ultimately very helpful. So the way to think about this vaguely is that что-нибудь is more indefinite than что-то. That's kind of the sloppy way of thinking about this. Что-то is more specific somehow or less indefinite than что-нибудь. So for example, что-то would mean something. Like I have something very definite in mind. This thing exists. I'm thinking about it. I know what I'm talking about. But I either don't know the particulars or I'm choosing not to tell about them, right? Now, что-нибудь is kind of more radically indefinite in that it's not only do I not know the particulars of the thing itself it may not even exist, right? It's sort of a purely hypothetical thing that may come into existence or may exist, but we don't know, and that's sort of the point of the indefinite, right? So let's look at some examples. Он купил что-нибудь? Did he buy something? Okay, so think about that just quickly. The question really is, well, did he buy something or did he not buy anything? And so the very existence of this something is in question, much less the particulars, right? So we say что-нибудь. And the answer would be да, он что-то купил, right? So this person answering knows that he did buy something, and he's not really giving us any specifics, so we get this indefinite что-то. Okay, so look, for example, what if you said он купил что-то? The reason that would be a bit weird is because even though you're asking a question, using что-то would imply that you know he bought something and you have something definite in mind, but for whatever bizarre reason, you're not, it's sort of like wink, wink. Did he buy something? Did he buy that certain something that I'm choosing not to specify in any way? So it's very unusual. Okay, so we can give a further set of generalizations that are pretty reliable and well worth learning. Не быть words tend to be used in questions and also things directed toward the future, like future tense, for example. Because if we're asking questions about something or we're looking to the future, then the possibility exists that there is nothing, right? That this thing, whatever we're talking about, won't materialize in the future. Or again, we're asking a question, did you buy something, where the point of the question is that we don't know whether or not this thing even exists at all, right? Then on the other hand, to indefinites tend to be kind of oriented towards the past tense, because if we know something in the past, we tend to have knowledge about whether or not it exists, right? And then the question isn't, was there such a thing, but what were the particulars that we don't know or we're choosing not to specify. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot to unpack here. And again, I would recommend going back to day 80 if you want to revisit this in more detail, because it is a very tricky topic. Anyway, for today, let's look at a painting, also rather well known. Всюду жизнь. Everywhere is life, right? Life is everywhere. And you see, it's a rather strange painting. These people are behind bars. We see a little je de up there, and you can barely see the je. But it probably stands for железная дорога, meaning railroad. So we can tell that they're actually in a rail car, like a rather crude sort of cattle car there. And there's a woman, some men, a woman with her child, and they're feeding the pigeons there. So kind of a strange painting. So let's fill in some blanks here with question words, indefinites, and negatives and try to learn something about what's going on here. Okay, number one, here we see a train and in it some kind of people, right? People of some sort, right? Um, okay, so we're looking at them. We can tell they exist. We just don't know who exactly they are, what's going on here. So this would be a to indefinite. Здесь мы видим поезд, и в нем каких-то людей. Sorry, it's accusative, right? People are animate, so the form is going to look like genitive. Здесь мы видим поезд, и в нем каких-то людей. Number two, somewhere. What kind of a train is this? Are these people going somewhere? Are they on their way somewhere? Okay, so we're thinking kuda, that would be a question word. One way to start with all these words is just what is your basic word? What's the question word? If we're asking about going somewhere, that's going to be kuda, right? Okay, so are these people going somewhere? Now, again, the question there is, are they going or aren't they? Or I mean, we really don't have any idea what's going on here. So we're asking these very open-ended questions. This will be не будь. Что это за поезд? Эти люди куда-нибудь едут? Они куда-нибудь едут? Are they going somewhere? Three, somewhere. Yes. Okay, now we have the response. Yes, indeed, they are going somewhere. Да, они куда-то едут. А куда именно? Well, where exactly? Четыре. For some reason. Okay, how would we ask about reasons? Well, we'd ask why, right? So, почему? Почему? Okay, so for some reason, we have no idea what it is, right? So very, we need an indefinite, basically. But this is kind of an interesting example, actually. We don't have any idea what the reason could be, but here we're learning that they're going to prison, right? They're bound for prison. And we assume there's some reason for that, even though we can already tell maybe there's some injustice involved here, right? What are these poor people, especially the kid, doing in this prison car? But we assume there is a reason, whether right or wrong, right? So we would say probably here, они почему-то едут в тюрьму, right? For some reason, we don't know what exactly, they're on their way to prison. Пять, or it could be also katorga, right? Forced labor somewhere in a camp in Siberia. Пять, something. It seems that they have done something bad. They've done something wrong. They look like they're being treated as criminals. Okay, so if they did something, well, we presume they must have done something, but we don't know the specifics. So we're going to use to. Кажется, что они что-то плохое сделали. Шесть, some kind of. They've committed some kind of crime. Okay, again, we assume they must have done something, but we don't know what, so this would call for a to. Они совершили какое-то преступление. Семь, what kind of people are these? Right, so what kind of, that's going to be какой, right, just a simple question word here. Какие это люди? What kind of people are these? Какие это люди? What kind of life do they have? What is their life like? Doesn't look very nice. Okay, жизнь is feminine, so какая у них жизнь? Восемь, some kind of. Okay, well, let's look at the people. We see there's a man with a beard. He looks like he's some kind of peasant. He doesn't look like a nobleman exactly. So, мужчина с бородой, какой-то крестьянин. He's some kind of peasant, right? Okay, девять, somewhere. Другой человек, другой мужчина, интеллигент. Okay, you see the man in the middle. He has a kind of a nice little mustache, and he seems a bit better dressed than the lower class man. And so we can, again, kind of speculating, he seems to be an intelligent, right? An educated person. So, другой человек, интеллигент, he studied somewhere. Okay, so we feel like he must have studied somewhere. We don't know where exactly. This is going to be to. Он где-то учился. Третий, the third man there, nearest to the child, муж и отец. So we can speculate that he's the parent, the father of this child. So this tells us what on earth the mother is doing here. It was rather commonplace in Russia if a husband was exiled to Siberia, sometimes the wife would choose to join him on that journey. And this was regarded as kind of an act of great self-sacrifice, and it was kind of widely admired. A lot of the wives of the Decembrists, right, the Decembrist revolt, when the those people were sent off to Siberia, a lot of their wives went. Those were called the Decembrist wives, and they sort of set a precedent for this type of self-sacrificial behavior. Okay, so that seems to be what's going on here, right? And of course, they're taking their child with them. Okay, so that doesn't seem exactly just, but that's the story. Okay, so anyway, for some reason they've arrested him. Okay, его, again, for some reason, почему-то арестовали. 11. Somehow, его жена, so his wife somehow has decided to go on the journey, and note yechet, right? So we're stressing this long, difficult journey that lies ahead. So it's not just that she's setting out with him one time to go to Siberia. The emphasis here is on the journey. So she's going to set out with she's going to travel with her husband to Siberia. Okay, so somehow she reached this decision. We don't know how, but it's clear that she's reached it, and so we're going to use to. Его жена как-то решилась ехать с мужем в Сибирь. Okay, 12, 12, somewhere. A fourth man is looking somewhere. Okay, you see him in the background. He's looking out the opposite window. Okay, so he's looking. Now, this is a bit funny in Russian. We get kuda here, right? You can also look in a certain direction. So we get this idea of motion we get an idea of motion, even though this is a kind of visual motion. Четвертый мужчина смотрит куда-то в другое окно. So he's looking off somewhere into, literally, the other window. 13, nothing. Okay, now we get some negatives. It seems that at these poor people, there is not nothing. Okay, so again, we're getting kind of a double negative here. We're also getting a genitive, because a genitive of non-existence. Кажется, что этих бедных людей нет ничего. It seems they have nothing. 14, no kind of. Okay, so that's going to be какой, никакой, right? So we're working with никакой. Now let's get the right case ending. They have no kind of life, no kind of happiness. Or we could say they have, I don't know how to put it, happiness of no kind whatsoever, no happiness. У них нет никакой жизни, никакого счастья. 15, somehow. Okay, so как, right, if we're asking how, that's going to be как, so we need an indefinite built off that again. And we want to say, but somehow they have to look for meaning in life, right? They have very little, almost nothing, but somehow they have to find a way to look for meaning in their lives. We're getting now, of course, to the point of the painting, right? So this is rather open-ended because it's not clear how, at all they would find meaning in their life, right? In a life like this that's objectively so deprived, right? So как-нибудь would work here. Им надо как-нибудь искать смысл в жизни. 16, from somewhere, pigeons have arrived by flying. Okay, so from somewhere, откуда, we're thinking откуда, right, where from, and now we need an indefinite, откуда-то. Right, so these pigeons have flown up. Now, here's a good example. Again, clearly they've flown from somewhere. We might not know exactly where, but it's obvious that there is this somewhere. So we get a to, indefinite. Откуда-то прилетели голуби. Ребенок их кормит. So the child's feeding them. And again, they don't probably have very much food at all. Presumably they're sprinkling out some breadcrumbs there. And so they're sharing what little they have, right? So that's kind of an old Christian ideal, right? Giving away the last thing they have to these animals. Anyway, 17, someone, and here we're asking a question. Can someone interpret the painting? Okay, now here we're asking a question. We don't know. Is there anyone in class, anyone out there who can interpret the painting? So this is an open-ended, indefinite кто-нибудь. Кто-нибудь может проинтерпретировать картину. Кто-нибудь может проинтерпретировать картину. Okay, you probably get the sense already, right? That the painting is entitled "Жизнь Всюду жизнь, right? Life is everywhere. And so I guess even in these kind of these prison-like conditions, they've managed to find life and find some glimmer of meaning in life by giving to other creatures, I guess. But this painting is also of course, a sort of political commentary, social commentary on injustice, right? Whenever you have a child and a mother caged up like that, it doesn't seem exactly right, right? So it's a rather bleak painting, and a lot of politics baked into it. A lot of the paintings we'll see from the 1900s had this kind of political or social edge to them. They're trying to depict life, Russian life, as it really is, and trying to rouse the viewer to some sort of political action, right? So something should be done about this. Just look at this painting. Look at these poor people. That type of subject for a painting. Okay, let's quickly, last thing today, review possessive pronouns and special modifiers, right? So again, special modifiers, these are basically adjectival, but their endings are a little bit different from our normal adjectives that we already reviewed yesterday. Now, again, for most of these, if you look at what's going on, you can pick up pretty easily, and it turns out that these aren't really that difficult. For example, look at moi, right? So moi, tvoi, svoi all work in the same way. Well, it ends in an и краткое, so that's going to be a soft stem. And so once you pick up on that, these are pretty predictable, really. Uh, so, look that over and just figure out what's going on there. Notice that, and then hopefully this won't be too difficult. That leaves nash and vash for these possessives. Nash and vash work the same. Now there we're getting yivo, yimu, yem, im, right? We're getting what look like soft endings. And maybe the easiest way to think about that is the spelling rule, right? We've got sh, we've got a final hushing sh. And so that's maybe the best way to think about why we're writing what look like soft endings on these words. Okay, let's fill in some blanks quickly with these possessive pronouns. Who are your favorite Russian writers? Okay, so we need plural. Кто твои любимые русские писатели? Два мой. Why don't I tell about my favorite poet? Okay, a поэзия, that's going to be masculine, prepositional. Давай я расскажу о моем любимом поэте. Right? Why don't I tell about my favorite poet? Okay, three, tvoi. Are there books of Pushkin? Are there books by Pushkin in your library? Okay, biblioteka is feminine, so we need prepositional with v. Есть книги Пушкина в твоей библиотеке? Четыре, наш. Sometimes they say, or it is sometimes said, that Pushkin is our everything. That's a little phrase you hear sometimes, right? Because Pushkin is so important. Иногда говорят, что Pushkin наше все. Okay, they're just modifying все, which is neuter. Пять, его. Okay, his. And we're using this here in a possessive sense, so we know that this form isn't going to change. Many people know his poems by heart. Многие знают его стихи наизусть. They know his, meaning Pushkin's poems, by heart. Svoi, okay, the reflexive pronoun. Pushkin really loved his wife. Pushkin очень любил свою жену, right? His own wife. Okay, you may know where we're going with this, right? He died in a duel fighting for his wife's honor, as was customary in the day, because he had all these people courting her. She was considered one of the most, if not the most beautiful woman in Russian high society when Pushkin married her. So anyway, he sort of knew he might be asking for trouble, and this marriage didn't go too well, although he did really love her. But unfortunately, he ended up obviously dying in this ridiculous duel. Okay, anyway, number 7. Have you seen her portrait? She was a beauty. Okay, so again, this is not going to change in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Вы видели ее портрет? Она была красавица. 8. Его. Others, of course, also loved his wife. Okay, we've got a scandal on our hands, right? Other men also loved Pushkin's wife, and they were constantly flirting with her at these society balls and whatnot. And she flirted back. She and a lot of people weren't very happy about that. And this, by the way, I don't have time to tell this story, but this went on for like months and months and months. And he challenged the. Anyway, there were these anonymous letters sent around about how Pushkin is the king of cuckolds, right? He's the grand secretary of the Royal Order of Cuckolds or something to that effect. It was written in French, and he thought he knew who had sent these anonymous letters around, and he challenged the guy to a duel. His name was Dantes, and the first duel was called off. It was postponed. Then Dantes married Pushkin's sister-in-law. It's hard to believe. He married, right, obviously the sister of Pushkin's wife. And so again, ultimately they did fight a duel, and Dantes killed Pushkin. Okay, anyway, we'll talk more about that some other time. Anyway, other people also loved his wife. Другие, конечно, тоже любили его жену. Now look how clear the Russian is making that these other men, it's not they're loving his wife, meaning Pushkin's wife, that is some other man's wife. Right? So we use его, not свой. 9 их. Pushkin read their anonymous letters. Pushkin читал их анонимные письма, right, which were just sent around town in order to insult Pushkin. 10 свой, okay, the reflexive. He, Pushkin, died in a duel defending the honor of his wife. Okay, the защищая, defending, that's a verbal adverb. We're going to learn what this form is later in the book. Он умер на дуэли, защищая честь своей жены, right, of his own wife, своей жены. Again, there it would be a mistake to use его, or, well, it actually wouldn't be a grammatical mistake, but here, given the context, it wouldn't be correct because he was defending the honor of his own wife. Okay, anyway, that's it for today. So tomorrow we're going to start a review of verbs. We're going to start out by going over all those conjugation patterns. So it won't be too fun, but it's very important, and hopefully you remember a lot of it from last year. Anyway, until then, до свидания, товарищи.